Welcome to BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. We can't go down like that. Last Thursday was a disaster, and I don't mean to bring that up in terms of like reliving horror or anything, but the reason I bring it up is because we weren't necessarily going to do a show today, actually. We talked about it last week. I promised you we would do a show, and that's part of the reason why we're here today. But also, we've been previewing Penn State spring football for what feels like a lunar cycle or two. Like, it's been a long pre-spring preview. So I wanted to give the guys the day off because there's not much more else we can talk about before James Franklin talks tomorrow. So James Franklin, his press conference tomorrow. Check it out here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. That's going to be what's going to come up for the bulk of this week. And then, of course, Penn State Pro Day coming up on Friday. But Thursday was so bad, I couldn't wait until Wednesday to be back on the air and get a mulligan for that. So I want to do a show. I told them we weren't doing a show, so I'm doing a solo show. That's kind of the setup for today. What we're talking about today is something I wrote about this weekend at bluewhiteillustrated.com. The top position battles for Penn State football this spring. These are the ones that I find the most interesting and the ones that I think are going to reveal the most about the team for the upcoming year. So this is not necessarily the most important. Just to let you know, 3, 2, and 1 are not going to be each individual wide receiver position. These are going to be positions that I think are interesting, important, and can tell us a little bit about the offense and the defense and maybe some of the positional breakdowns throughout the spring and maybe some of those things. So that's coming up on today's show. Of course, your questions and comments. If we have time at the end of the show, we'll do a mailbag. I still have one question left from last week we didn't get to. So we'll be doing all of that on the show today, plus previewing Pro Day. Because again, spring practice starts this week. It seems like this keeps happening, where it's like, here's one big thing that's happening. Here's another big thing that's happening. National Signing Day, and then suddenly Penn State's in a playoff game, a home game, first ever against SMU. These things keep happening in the calendar because there's no rhyme or reason to it. So I wanted to make sure we got a Pro Day preview here on the show that's coming up in just a little bit. But of course, as always, and I need to start with this because this is really important this time of year, people don't pick up on the fact that spring football is starting. People get into their hibernation. They're watching March Madness. They're, going outside for the first time and seeing the sun, So let them know we're here. Penn State football spring practice, that's coming up. So please subscribe to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. If you're here, join the conversation in the chat. We'll be getting to your comments and thoughts here in just 1 second. As always, you are my co-host when I'm here by myself. So I always appreciate your help and support there. But of course, liking and subscribing, that's all great. And of course, when we have intel, some great stuff from Sean Fitz up right now. Ryan Snyder, Greg Pickle was just awesome at the wrestling tournament this weekend. Subscribe to bluewhiteillustrated.com. It's just $1 for you to try us out. If you like it, you can stay on, get that intel. I bet that once you do, you're going to love it. We have a ton of people that have come from the YouTube channel that are now part of the website. So you can check it out. All the great content and information that you don't always get all here, you can get over there on the site. So those are my things. And of course, if you're listening on the podcast version, we love you guys. One of the most consistent groups of people I think I've ever met in my life. The number of people that download and listen to our show is the exact same, whether it's the off season, deep into like big picture talk, or we're in the middle of it, the thick of it in the season. So if you're out there, we love you. Thank you. I don't talk about you guys and talk to you guys enough because I'm presenting this as a show, on camera and all that stuff. But please tell your friends about the podcast version. You can always subscribe, like, comment, all that great stuff. Okay. Now that I bored you to death in the first 4 minutes with all those things that we're supposed to do and I just never do, I want to get right into it. Here are our 5 position battles for spring that I find most interesting.
Number 5.
Okay, so number 5 is a right guard. And this is the least talked about starting position that's open on the Penn State roster. We just assume Cooper Cousins is going to be the starter at this position. I think that's a fair assumption. But nobody's handed a job at Penn State. And I know that there's some window dressing around that. There's some, what's the reality? And that's fair. But who's in the competition, I think, is going to tell us a little bit about what some of the plans are for the offensive line. And I'm not trying to stump for this, but I just think there's a realistic possibility that a guy like Javen Williams is involved. And that's really why I wanted to bring this up, because Cooper Cousins, and then you look at some of the depth behind him, veteran JB Nelson, this is a big year for him. He's coming out of the offseason healthy, the focus, the fitness, the potential that he has, all that has to come together if he wants to be a part of the lineup this year. Because he was a key reserve and he played well at times, but it's basically been since the beginning of 2023, I want to say, that he has been considered a starter, right? So he was the starter after Landon Tangwall went down, and then Venga Uwane took over, essentially, and has been the starter ever since. So that's the left guard position. But there is an opening now at right guard. Sal Wormley's not coming back through the door, so who's a part of the competition? Cooper Cousins, JB Nelson, and then a lot of young guys. Alex Berkmeyer, Chim Diono. I guess you could put TJ Shanahan in there, although I think he's more of a guy that's going to be a long-term project. So who else is in the competition? They're going to want to have a competition. And where Javen Williams plays this spring, I think, is going to be fascinating. Drew Shelton is going to get a lot of veteran rest, right? And that doesn't mean he's not going to be at camp. He's not in Cabo. He's not on extended spring break. But when it comes to like those live reps, banging and thudding in practice where some of those injuries can happen, where is Javen Williams? Is he playing left tackle? Is it Egan Boyer? Is it JB Nelson? Like who's going to be taking some of those reps off of Drew Shelton? And then who's going to be fighting and competing with Cooper Cousins? And I bring up Javen because he's got the position for versatility, and they were experimenting with him at guard last year. If he wants to have a path to the field this year, and I think of the young guys, he's probably the closest to ready based on what we saw last year, his talent, and that expected development timeline. Right guard is the position, right? I mean, I guess he could spell Venga Ioane at left guard, but guard in general is going to be where he finds the most reps and snaps on the field. Maybe early in the non-conference, he can play a lot at left tackle. But if he wants a long-term role in the offense, it's going to be Cooper Cousins, Javen Williams. I think that could be a really fun battle to follow if it happens. Because I think it's easy to presume it's Cooper Cousins and then nobody else, but that's not how they like to do things. So I think they need to manufacture a little bit of competition there. I think that would be the way that they would get into it and be able to create, some sort of thing where it's not just a runaway freight train of Cooper Cousins playing that position. Also, I think if you want Cooper Cousins to play center next year after Nick Dawkins moves on, you need to have some flexibility to move him over to center, because he only got, I don't know, maybe 10 reps at center in a game last year. I'm sure he got tons of them, throughout the offseason. But if you're going to be doing that throughout the offseason now, and he's maybe the second team center, who's your other right guard? Is it going to be just JB? That feels kind of thin. So some of the depth has to step up no matter what. And I think the best, combination of all of that would be Javen Williams as somebody who's athletic, explosive, and I think could help with a certain aspect of this offense that we saw in the postseason last year. Penn State really liked to run. And I don't mean just run the football. They liked their outside zone to be fast, like running to the sideline. There's a bunch of different ways you can run any scheme in a bunch of different ways, right? So if you want to run outside zone, you can focus on double teams at the line of scrimmage, or you can focus at getting to the second level, or you can focus on getting to the second level aggressively and sprinting out of your position if you're the offensive lineman, whether you're the guard or you're the center climbing to the second level. Javen Williams is super athletic. And I think at guard, he could challenge some of those those linebackers and challenge some schemes by making that even more explosive and even more dangerous, creating bigger seams for those running backs. Now, these are all kind of speculative things because it's not like they always ran that extreme wide outside zone, but it's something that I know Andy Kotelnicki wants to do. And athletes at guard matter. And with Penn State's beef recently at that guard position, Cooper Cousins, Javen Williams, they provide more explosive athleticism. Venga Ioane is really quick on his feet, and he's really fluid for a guy who's 340. He is not explosive fast. You wouldn't expect him to be at that size. So there is, I think, a little bit of that I always find interesting in the body types that they have here and how they recruit different positions. That's something I'm really interested to see, because they can tell us a couple of things about the scheme of how they're going to run those zone concepts, and then who's going to be involved in some of these position battles. I like Chimdi Ono's size, but again, he was a long-term development project. Some of these guys in their third year do have to step up and be a part of the game plan for this upcoming year from a depth perspective. As much as we talk about the depth, there has to be a transition now between the potential and the product. And I would say Javen would be the first guy in that conversation that I would point to as somebody who can make that transition wherever it might be on the offensive line. After 5, we're going to take a quick break to tell you about our sponsor, which is always here on the Monday show, is Anti-Fragile. If you want to check out an awesome place to have a drink downtown in State College, you can see here if you watch it on the YouTube channel, that's where they brew it right there. That's the kombucha. You're going to see the beer in just a little bit. They brew everything on site. You can tell that something is fresh and it's real and it's something that is made in small batches, because they don't have the same beer over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, right? Because they make new stuff all the time. So they're iterating, they're finding new and different things to brew. And I love the fact that they love to partner with local companies to get the best ingredients possible with their beers and with their coffees and with some of the things they partner with local companies like Rothrock to get the best coffee you can find in State College. They have other, they get locally sourced, base ingredients for. I don't know how to brew beer. Here's the problem. I don't know how to brew beer. They do. So you should check out Anti-Fragile. If you have noticed, I'm a little rusty on this read because this is Nate and Fitz's territory when it comes to talking about Anti-Fragile. I can't drink beer anymore. I love their hard kombucha, but they're known for beer. So you should go check it out. And it's an awesome atmosphere to go in downtown State College to hang out. That's what I love. That's the thing I love more than anything, is finding a good place to sit and have a drink and have a conversation. It's not so loud that you leave hoarse because and your ears are bleeding because you were yelling trying to talk to somebody and you have no idea what they said. So check out Anti-Fragile, especially spring football's coming up. Make sure you make it a stop on your trips through town. Okay, number 4 on our list.
Number 4.
Okay, number 4 is indicative of maybe where the offense is going, and that's why running back 3 is super interesting for this spring. And it's really a conversation that's going to happen throughout the year. And this is a prediction as much as it is an assessment of they have potentially 7 running backs that can contribute this year, and they're going to battle it out to maybe get to 4, right? A 2 deep behind Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. But in the long-term view of what I've seen from Andy Kotelnicki, not everything has to translate, right? Not every single thing that he did at Kansas has to show up, but they used a lot of it last year. One of the things they didn't really get to because the young guys were still very green and they lost Cam Wallace was there were a lot of 3 running back sets. And by a lot, I mean, under 100 snaps in a season, but more than you see elsewhere in college football. Now, that 3rd running back has a different job. It's not just like, if you can think of it like the first 2 as the running backs and the 3rd guy as that movable chess piece who's doing orbit motions, sweeps, running routes, leaking out of the backfield, all the deception, all of the trickery in Andy Kotelnicki's offense. It kind of got dispersed to a bunch of different positions last year. So Corey Smith, Quentin Martin, Tyke Hayes, Cam Wallace, if he's healthy, those 4 running backs in the spring are going to have an opportunity to showcase their skills. So there's kind of 2 thoughts in my mind. Primary backups to the top 2. And in that sense, I don't think the depth chart changes all that much. Maybe it's linear in that sense of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1A, 1B, and then 3, 4. But it's carving out a role in the offense. And I think these young guys, looking at the offense in general, this is the place that has the most depth that could be ready to contribute this year, that we have the most evidence of being good. Corey Smith flashed last year. Quentin Martin got hurt a couple of times and had to come out a couple of games, but looked good. I go back to the UCLA game, good receiver out of the backfield, expanding that role. People are thirsty for some versatility in the offense to play Quentin Martin at wide receiver. I'm just going to say, this is me splitting the difference with you. He's not lining up at receiver. He can line up at a receiver position, but he's a running back. He practices with the running backs, but he's got the versatility to run some routes and be a gadget player in the offense. That's what I see from the running back 3. Because you look at the tight end position, that's absolutely in play to have 3 tight ends on the field again. It's super limiting. I don't love the conversation I'm having with you right now because it just condenses the field so much. But we don't know anything about the receivers right now, and I don't want to project that suddenly they're going to take over the offense and this is going to be all fixed, right? So how do you take what you have, and when you have up to 6 running backs, hammer on using 2 of them all the time? You can make that the base offense. And so that becomes more important to have that RB3, and do you then expand that role within the offense? And again, my problems at times with what happened at Kansas was that it became almost triple option. It was at one point triple option football because they didn't have a quarterback like Drew Aller to throw the ball. So there is going to be a balance of they're going to have the drop back passing game. They're going to have that element, but having a third running back might be able to blend some of these concepts. And I don't think the option game that got split again between Bo Prabula and Tyler Warren is going anywhere, right? That seems to be something that Andy Kotelnicki wants. He wants that true triple option of the handoff and then the opportunity to throw the ball from a player on the team. And so I don't know who that is, but I do think you could see maybe even some Wildcat this year, like a pure 3 running back backfield and have a triple option off of that with somebody running the ball. That is, again, pure speculation. But I'm just looking at where the talent is on the team and trying to think like somebody who's trying to generate these plays for players that they think deserve to have the offense crafted around them. Because if we go back to last year, it wasn't necessarily the receivers were bad. I think there were some issues in the offense that led to a lack of confidence, that led to diminished play over time. They weren't horrible, but they were used in specific roles in specific ways. And so that led to Tyler Warren being the guy, right? Like feed more into what is working, and Tyler Warren was always working. This might be what is working next year. And I think there's a lot of people that are going to be, I think there's going to be people that are super excited about that. I think there's some people in the chat that even love that. Emmers wants to know about what about the fullback? So I don't know if you're trolling here, but do you know that when you've got 2 running backs on the field and Nick Singleton is blocking for Katron Allen, technically that makes Nick Singleton a fullback. If you've got Tyler Warren in the backfield or as an H-back, or you've got Luke Reynolds in the backfield or Khalil Dinkins, and they're lead blocking from the backfield, technically all those players are fullbacks. So in a modern offense, you don't have 1 fullback. You have 3. Like you could have Quentin Martin being a fullback on a play, or you could have whomever, pick your favorite dude. Cooper Cousins could be a fullback on a play. So there you go. Tyler Warren was the fullback last year. That is absolutely correct. So like you've got a lot of different options, and that's what these 2 running back sets are all about. Except that those running backs, those fullbacks can catch and run and do all the things within the offense. Okay. I hope it's not that. I do hope there's some of that, but I hope that number 3 here on the list actually solves some of the problems for the offense. Let's get to number 3.
Number 3.
So I know that it's not number 1, but we're talking about the slot receiver position. And again, I wanted to be more specific than just saying wide receiver and having the circular conversation that we've had for about 4 months. I think there's some things that we can reasonably assume while also being wrong to assume those right now. Again, all the receiver positions are open, but we have to have a starting point Penn State has to say, okay, our first unit is going to be blank. And so I'm going to make some assumptions here that Devontae Ross wasn't brought in to be a backup or a slot receiver. Devontae Ross, TBD on things, but they've gone well enough. He's gained 16 pounds, according to Chuck Losey, maybe 17 by the time we're talking now, in terms of like the progress he's made. I'm assuming those two guys are going to play outside receiver. And because Andy Kotelnicki's offense is basically like you have 5 dice, like in Yahtzee, and you roll them, and then however they land is where they line up. Like there's a little bit of that in his offense. But again, we have to have some kind of organization to this for it to make sense. We can't just talk about it as receiver within the context of a play with formations, 3x1s, 2x2s in terms of where everyone's lining up on the field. So when Penn State goes into those sets, into those 3 receiver sets, and generally when they want to play 2 receivers, I'm assuming Kyron Hudson would be the X, Devontae Ross would be the Z. And a quick understanding of those, if you don't know what that means, the X receiver typically plays to the boundary or the short side of the field. He gets a lot of one-on-one matchups. Physical receiver, close quarter combat with corners, right? Think about A.J. Harris is the kind of guy you're going to go up against more often in the boundary. To the field, athleticism, explosiveness, running routes in space. There's a little bit of everything at the Z position. It can be a little bit of everything. It can be a number 2 X. It can be a slot receiver with a little more size, vertical ability. You can run your number 1 through the Z position too. But generally, it's going to be a guy that has route running chops, speed into space. So that would be Devontae Ross on this roster. Those 2 are set. So now we're back to the same conversation we've had for about 3 years, which is who's playing in the slot for Penn State. Tyser Denmark, Liam Clifford, Caden Saunders. Those are the 3 guys that I think have the opportunity to be the number 1 slot receiver, and then from there, fill out the rest of the depth chart. Tyser Denmark can play on the outside. I think he could play a little bit behind Kyron Hudson. Liam Clifford can play on the outside, could play all 3 positions. What are you getting out of him in those positions? What are you getting out of him in those situations? Primarily, I think it was like 71% of his routes came from the slot last year. So he's a slot receiver who can move around. And then finally, Caden Saunders, who's only a slot receiver, just based on what we've seen from him historically and his size and his athleticism and some of the traits that would make him not a fit elsewhere. I guess if you were desperate, he could play Z, but best suited in the slot. I think everyone assumes Tyser Denmark is going to be the guy that steps up. Is it a full, he takes over the position and everyone is behind him? I don't know. That's what we're going to find out in the spring. I think that's what everyone wants. But that slot receiver position, figuring that out, assuming those other 2 are taken care of, is going to determine a good bit of the depth. So I'd say those 5 players, those 5 receivers are the ones we're going to be talking about most this spring. That's my assumption to start. Whatever else you get from the receiver position is then a bonus. So Peter Gonzalez, Anthony Ivy, Josiah Brown, Matt Otten, Kobe Howard, any of those 5 receivers that, are young or depth guys, right? Any of those players, if they step up and they participate in the competition, I think you're pleasantly surprised by that. So I'm trying to also level set some expectations that as of spring, the day before spring football, you're not expecting Peter Gonzalez or Kobe Howard to challenge for the number 1 outside receiver position with a guy like Kyron Hudson, who's a veteran coming from another Power 5 program that you recruited from the transfer portal. So I would assume he's going to again, there's going to be competition, but he's the guy. So, and this is JMO. JMO says, Penn State got big plays from the slot last year. So this is a great point. You can run your offense through any receiver, any position. So that's the beauty of offense. That's the beauty of play calling and play design. Penn State's been led by slot receivers more than once. KJ Hamler operated primarily from the slot. I think 95 to 99% of his routes came from the slot when he was the number 1 receiver. There's advantages and disadvantages. You can bracket coverage more. You can create more high lows. You can throw through traffic. It's a little more congested over the middle of the field, but it's harder to get pure double teams than it would be on the outside. Now, on the outside, if you've got threats across the field, including the running back and the running game, and then you're singled outside, there's more room to run, literally and figuratively. You can generate more explosive plays from that outside position. So yeah, you can have either, right? And if you've got a balance of threats across the field, you can pick by week and by matchup who you want to throw the ball to based on those things. That's an opportunity in this offense as well. Like if you want to say whoever, Devontae Ross running from the slot can also produce explosive touchdowns. And I think that's the beauty of this is the hope here for the receiver position. Let's step away from our slot receiver position and talk about the offense in general, because it's not going to be just those three guys. Kyron Hudson's going to line up in the slot based on formation and motions. You're going to have Ross line up in the slot as well. Last year, again, I'm speaking in generalities, the bulk of Omari Evans, his contribution to the offense came from the slot on one route. He ran posts against quarters coverage and got touchdowns, and that was a staple in the offense. It was also a one-trick thing, where if the defense was like, hey, we're just not going to we're not going to bite on Tyler Warren running the stop route at 8 yards, because we've seen this on film. That guy in the slot is a red alert to not give up leverage. What if now you have Devontae Ross who can run that route from anywhere? You don't have to be so specific about how you're doing these things, because then you got Tyser Demmer can play on the outside. You can go different receiver combinations. And this is only a slice of the offense, right? So you're only using 3 receivers 45 to 48% of the time. The rest of the time, they're going to run 2 of everything else. That's where I think the opportunity for improvement this year is, with the receiver position, and how you can use, to JMO's point, slot plays to generate explosive plays. Ryan says, is it fair that if you aren't threatening a defense with outside receivers, you're condensing the field and not able to use the whole field? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's my biggest criticism generally of the offense over the last 2 to 2.5 years. I'd even go back to 2022 when you had Parker Washington and Mitchell Tinsley. Again, Parker Washington was your main threat, super reliable quasi-possession receiver over the middle. Wasn't super healthy, so he wasn't his best like he is now with the Jaguars, where he's actually healthy. And he's a little bit faster, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So there was kind of a limitation to that receiving group, which didn't threaten to the outside. Mitchell Tinsley didn't have the speed to get open deep. So you have since Jahan Dotson, since 2021, you're going to get, hopefully, a better balanced offense if this works out. But there's no guarantee that this is going to work out. There's no guarantee this will actually all come to fruition. We are in hope season, so I'm giving you the hope you should. I think the hope you should have. JMO, he wants to know, do you think Jim Knowles helps the wide receiver position self-scouting? I do not. I think I'm giving you the basics. The offensive staff knows way more than this. They understand routes and combinations, how to get guys open. This is a talent thing. This is a positional aptitude, and not even just a talent in terms of height, weight, speed, abilities, application of talent thing. So potentially three new starters, potentially 3 new outcomes across the board at receiver. I think there's some things Jim Knowles can help with in terms of, how he was able to defend Andy Kotelnicki's ideas and concepts. But I don't think that helps against Notre Dame. And I don't think that helps against Ohio State, because he's not at Ohio State anymore. So those issues are not a thing anymore. And both those guys are kind of Big 12, they made their biggest impact in their career before joining Ohio State or Penn State in the Big 12. And I'm not saying that their defense and their offenses are only suited for that conference, but there has been a lot of proliferation of some of those concepts into the Big 10, taking good ideas from other conferences and adding them to big boy football with trench play. No disrespect to the good teams in the Big 10 or to the Big 12. You know who you are, Kansas State. But those ideas, I feel like, are on a similar parallel path, right? Matt Patricia is the defense coordinator now, right? Do I have that right? For Ohio State, that's an NFL scheme. That is absolutely not anything close historically to what Jim Knowles did at Ohio State. Sorry, I'm trying to read this all at the same time. Yes, he is the new defense coordinator for Ohio State. So I feel like that's a vast shift that isn't really going to help in that sense. Okay, so what do we do? 5-10 minutes on receivers, probably cutting you guys short by about 4 minutes, 5 minutes on receiver conversation. But let's get to number 2, because this is where I think the Jim Knowles conversation picks up and gets interesting.
Number 2.
Here we have a battle of positions, not just players. We're talking about the slot, the nickel position in Penn State's defense. Now, in the article that I wrote at bluewhiteillustrated.com, if you want to check that article out, go into more detail about some of these things. I kind of laid this out as, and maybe I don't feel like I was specific enough in the language of, this is corner versus safety as much as it is Zion Tracy versus, I don't know, from the safety position. So that's the question. The soul of the defense, the personality of the defense, I do think is in certain aspects going to be determined by who plays the nickel, because that creates the adjustments you need to make in the rest of the scheme. So let's say what I assume is going to happen, Zion Tracy is going to be the number one player at this position. Start with the incumbent. He's going to get the first crack at it, and then we'll go from there. He is a slot corner, unless he is bulked up 10 pounds and he's 191 pounds, which is still not super big. He has cornerback skills, elite feet, transition, can stay with just about anybody in single coverage. Struggled to tackle last year. No way around that. Struggled to tackle and to get off blocks, even against receiver screens. That has to improve. That absolutely has to improve. But is there a safety in the group that can provide the cornerback skills necessary to alleviate the pressure elsewhere and to provide that run fit in the game, in the run game? Because remember, they wanted to use Jalen Reed, who's 200 plus pounds, at that nickel position last year. He's not going to be your number one coverage corner in the slot, right? So against certain teams, certain situations, they would have put Tracy or Cam Miller out there anyway. But who's the base? What's the personality on rundowns, right? On downs where the offense can call anything, run or pass, who's out there and how are they interacting with the run game? Because you can fix this in a couple of different ways. If you've got a slot corner out there, now your field safety is adding into the box and that guy is playing outside in the formation. Maybe he inverts to a deep 2, whatever, however you want to do that. You can fill for the run from different locations. Your boundary safety, everyone shifts over, and now your Mike is playing kind of outside. Your Will's kind of playing middle linebacker, or maybe you drop that guy into the middle. Like, there's 1,000 different iterations. It does not work here for me to talk about this in visual terms because I can't say enough words for you to understand the picture in my brain. But if you have a safety out there in the slot, now what coverages can you call with that guy? And how does that affect where the other safeties are in relation to the run game? Because when it's a linebacker, that guy's playing the box, right? He's playing the C gap. He's playing the B gap, whatever you want him to play. And he's not covering deep. You have to have coverage that accounts for that. The point of what Tom Allen did and what they wanted to do last year and what they're going to do this year with Jim Knowles is that player can play at any level of the field. The goal is that 11th defender does everything: blitz, tackle, coverage, zone, man, all of it well enough that you can put him in any situation and call just about any defense within the scope of reason, right? So who has the best composite of those skills? And what's the hardest thing you're going to ask them to do to be as diverse as possible so that you don't pigeonhole yourself into, we can't play man with X out there. From the safety position, and this is really specifically talking now about the safety position, which one of those guys provides you the widest range of outcomes that you can put in the slot? I would contend with you right now, at least from a experience, and we've seen it on film perspective, that would be Zakee Wheatley. but you're not playing him at the nickel. Like, that's just not going to happen. He's going to be one of the safeties in the traditional safeties, boundary or field, depending on how they want to run the defense. And I've talked about that a lot this offseason in terms of different ways they can use those safeties. So, Dejon Lane, King Mack. I always want to throw Antoine Belgrave Shorter into this conversation because I think from a traits perspective, he can do everything we just discussed, albeit I don't know how he specifically feels against the run or how he blitzes. I think he can tackle. I think he's physical, again, with receivers, but what is the punching above your weight ability of that guy? And where is he mentally? Like, he's a redshirt freshman. I don't want to throw him too early into the conversation. But then if you're talking about dime defense or playing a bunch of players at this position, you got other corners you can put in the conversation. Kenny Wosley can be in the conversation as a guy who's obvious with his feet and his athleticism. So there's going to be a lot of bodies here, but it's about who's playing the most, who's there on early downs. That's, to me, that's what I'm looking for in that. Mack isn't close to a linebacker like Reed. I would disagree, Coin Intelligence Agency. I think he's closer to a linebacker than Reed was, at least from what I've seen of him on film. He hits way above his weight. And I know he's 5'9", and I know he's like 195 pounds right now. This dude hits. He's hit since he was a senior in high school. He actually struggles more. You would think at his size, he would have that hybrid versatility. I don't see that in his skill set. At least what happened at Alabama. And the context clues of he was not part of the Lion conversation backing up Jalen Reed last year. He was at the field and the boundary during the blue-white game, and then he transferred. And then we lost all other information. I'd say he's closer to like a linebacker safety hybrid than he is a safety corner hybrid. That would be the problem of putting him out there. Now, he could be that guy. I don't know. They have to make that decision because I do think eventually they want to transition this to more of a safety body type with quarterback skills than somebody who is a slot corner, a nickel. Because you can always put those guys, you can always sub those guys in against teams that run 3 receivers and have like pure like spread option football speed, no huddle, up-tempo stuff. You can always put in a nickel in those situations and try and make all of that work on the back end. Okay, probably spent too much time, probably said a bunch of things that didn't totally make sense. Hopefully I didn't. Hopefully that all made sense and you understand what I'm talking about of how I think that might be the most interesting position this spring to follow. It'll tell us a lot about Penn State's plan for the defense, but it is not the most interesting and important because in the end, I think it's going to be Zion Tracy and then we'll figure it out after that. Number 1, pretty important, no idea.
Number 1.
Okay, so if you're watching on the YouTube channel, I like to put up little graphics and kind of intro slides. Mike Linebacker, I don't have enough cutouts. I don't have enough pictures of the players we're going to be talking about to even have a slide. So that's why Tony Rojas is on the slide. And this is actually really important because it's anybody but Tony at middle linebacker. And I want to get into the why here. So we're going to start with positional understanding of what you're asking those guys to do, and then understanding the Mike linebacker position beside it. So kind of like the safety conversation, you have some general rules and some general things you're asking these players to do. You're taking a linebacker off the field when you're playing nickel as your base defense. So you are not subtracting responsibilities from the linebacker position. You are adding them to the ones that are still there. So what I mean is, if you had a Sam linebacker, you'd have a guy that would cover tight ends. He'd walk down, be more physical at the line of scrimmage, and then you'd have your between the tackles, run-thumping middle linebacker. In modern football now, you've got a nickel corner who's going to handle the flat. He's going to handle slots and things like that. So now you need both guys to play the run really well in the box. And you need both guys to cover really well in the box. But kind of like the safety position, field and boundary, you specialize in one over the other. So will linebackers by alignment, because if you think of the slot position as the Sam linebacker, the third underneath coverage defender, you still have the middle linebacker in the middle. It's just now there's just 2 linebackers, and the other guy, from a coverage perspective, is a different body type, but the coverage is agnostic of who's out there. The will linebacker, because he's lined up on the outside, there's more opportunities for him to get single coverage against tight ends, some slow slot receivers. We've seen Tony Rojas handle a couple guys in slot coverage like that. And of course, like running backs out of the backfield. The middle linebacker generally has easier coverage assignments in man coverage. There are obvious examples when that goes horribly wrong. Kobe King in the Orange Bowl. But that doesn't have to be how it happens, right? So you can scheme around stuff like that. And Kobe King was that big physical middle linebacker who primarily his job is run thumping, but has to cover. The ideal would be everyone does everything all the time, right? Your middle linebacker can cover and tackle. Your will linebacker is an uber athlete that flies around the field in coverage and blitzes. And to that point, you want your best athlete, your highest potential explosive playmaking player at that will position. It's not a coincidence that you've got Micah Parsons, Abdul Carter playing that will linebacker role. Tony Rojas is the next guy there. So that athleticism, you want that as a versatile chess piece that moves around a little bit. The Mike linebacker, despite being 2 box linebackers, he stays in the box more often. So who's going to be the guy? Veteran, leader, football IQ. Veteran kind of encapsulates all that stuff into one thing. But you can have veterans that don't have great football IQ. You know what I mean? You want somebody that you trust, that you know a lot about, and that's going to command the defense and get everyone lined up and is going to do their job really well. There's not a lot. There's not a lot on the roster that ticks all of those boxes. So do you get creative? Do you move? Ideally, Dom DeLuca is your backup to Tony Rojas. And it's a rep share, right? The less they play 3 linebackers, and I think it'll be even less than they did last year, the less that makes sense to have those 2 guys play the same position. So Keon Wiley, that's the list of veterans, right? And then you get into young guys that are unproven, but need to be making an impact pretty soon. Tammy Robinson is the guy I think that can solve a lot of problems for Penn State, even in terms of depth. He doesn't have to be a starter. He has to be a guy that takes a step this spring and makes you feel like you can exhale. Ooh, okay, we've got a guy that we can put out there and that can play. Because you're talking about a guy that in high school played safety, played edge defender, played linebacker, played all over the field, and looked reasonably comfortable doing all of it, except for edge defender, by the way. He might be a guy that can do all those things. And you can hide guys that aren't great in coverage by blitzing them or having them be spies, but you prefer a guy that can do all of the things. I don't know. We're going to find out. Like Kari Jackson, Anthony Specca, they're all on the list. Alex Tash, probably not. Freshman, kind of like a center. It was crazy to think Cooper Cousins was going to be the starting center last year. It would be crazy to think you're going to have a starting Mike linebacker that's a freshman. Also, this guy has to be the one with the helmet radio, right? So you need somebody who his teammates respect and has command. And I'm not saying you can't have a freshman do that. I'm just saying most of the time that doesn't happen. And that's where it will be hard for a guy like, Anthony Specca as a redshirt freshman to jump the line. Or Kari Jackson, a guy who's been injured and out of the lineup and, injured in high school. And I think there's guys that fit, if you want to have that traditional kind of Mike linebacker approach. But which one of those guys is going to hit the turbo on the development? I think you got to really hope it's Keon Wiley. I think you got to really hope it's Keon Wiley. I don't know what you're asking here, Eggman. Robinson or Nelson? Are you asking me to pick between the two? Because they're almost different play. They almost play different positions. Dakari Nelson, first off, he's not going to be out there a whole lot this year, I don't think. Got banged up last year. That's a player who is going to be a will, and maybe a will only. Maybe he gets to 235 in his career. I don't know. but it would be a shock to me if he's a guy that could play Mike linebacker and could play with the physicality and all the things I just talked about. I don't know if he's a guy that could be in the conversation for that this year. But he's also, I think right now I have him and LeVar Arrington 2 as backup will linebackers. They're stacked, by the way, at guys that can play will. It's the guys in the middle that I think we're having the conversation for. And it's the good news is it's a clean slate, right? So this is a new defense. They have the same position coach, but a new defensive coordinator that might be asking different things of the defense. So that's the list. Number 1 is linebacker, middle linebacker. And I think everyone's still looking with an eyeball to the portal, right? For that and for a couple of other things. Things that didn't make the list. Honorable mention, tight end. I think part of the problem is the competition. Andrew Rapplier probably won't be out there for most of it this spring. I would just imagine, getting hurt and having the injury he had in September. It's a little early for him to return. And then you're talking about freshman, Kortovich, Joey Schlaffer's in there. The competition, feel pretty confident that Khalil Dinkins is the number 1 because seniority, and he's proven it over a multitude of years that he gets the first opportunity to be the number 1 tight end. It would take a lot, I think, in the spring specifically to have somebody move ahead of him. So that didn't make the list. Backup quarterback, I have no interest in terms of its impact on 2025. I think it's important, and I'm interested in the players, and I think those players are good. But in terms of most interesting, that'll work itself out. And I think we'll get a good idea of it because I think there's going to be some, veteran load management for Drew Aller as well. But those are the ones I think a lot of people talk about. And then I have blinders too. Like I'm focused in on some more niche things. Although starting guard and linebacker is not necessarily niche. So last thing here on the show is we're going to talk about the NFL draft and the Penn State Pro Day coming up on Friday. Of course, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We're going to be out there in force to give you all the updates on the message board, on social media. We're going to get all those 40s for you. We're going to get the times as best we can. It is not an efficient way that they get us that information. The scouts all get it right there, at the finish line. We're 40 yards away in the end zone. But we get you that information as best we can about who's performing, who's standing out. I'll be getting a bunch of video and not knowing what to do with it in the moment. All that this Friday, starting at sometime a.m., probably around 10. But everything kind of gets going in the afternoon, like 11, 12, 1. And then we'll have conversations with the athletes afterwards. But I think it's a really interesting pro day because it's probably one of the most anticipated since COVID for Penn State because there was no NFL Combine and a lot of guys didn't. Michael Parsons and Odafe Owe were that was a big combine for them that they didn't get to have. But think about it. Abdul Carter didn't participate in the combine. Potential number 1 overall pick. Tyler Warren, potential top 10 pick, didn't participate in the combine. Kevin Winston Jr., a guy that everyone is sleeping on, except for people that are in the draft community that have watched his film. They're like, okay, he's probably a top 3 safety in this class, if not a top 2 from a performance standpoint on the field. But we haven't seen him since really West Virginia. And before that, we haven't seen him since the Fiesta Bowl, right? Against Ole Miss. So it's been a while and people, I think, tend to forget about players. So those 3 guys presumably are going to be working out. What are they cleared for? Remember, KJ Winston was cleared according to the timeline given by Adam Schefter, given by his agent, 24 days ago. March 1st is when he was cleared. I guess 23 days ago. So is that enough time that he's going to be ready to run? Is he running the 40? What is he doing? What drills are all these players doing? I think that's still a little bit up in the air. But guys like Kobe King, the only guy that has any sort of okay, we know what he is, and I think he's done a good job of positioning himself in the draft is Jalen Reed. So everybody else has a lot of things to answer, and there's going to be so many people at this pro day. I think all 32 teams are going to be there. You're going to have some major decision makers in town to see Abdul Carter in the top 5. Tyler Warren's going to be a big thing. And then beyond that, so those are the things I want to know. What I want to know about those starters, aside from are they participating, is do we get a freak show from Abdul Carter? Are we going to get 37-inch vertical? How heavy is he? These things matter to me. I understand that a lot of people are like, it doesn't matter what weight he is. The size you are doing the things you're doing to me matters. Because if we've seen this before of like guys that blow up for the combine and then work down to a weight they're actually going to play at, and then it doesn't translate to the NFL. Abdul Carter absolutely translates to the NFL, whether he's 250 or 255 or 257. But I do still think the bigger the better. Like if he can play closer to 260, he's going to be an unstoppable force that can go into any situation against any offensive lineman and play to the level we've seen. If not, I think he can still be great. I would just love to see him be 260, right? And be that you can play him as a 3-4 outside linebacker. You can play him as a 4-3 D end. You can play him as a move piece. It doesn't matter. But how big is he and how freaky are the, like, we want to see the freak show, right? That's what we want to see from Abdul Carter. Is he healthy enough? All that stuff, we're going to find out. Hopefully it's not a letdown. I mean, here's the thing. He's a top 5 pick, full stop. Does he need to do any of these things? No, he doesn't need to do any of these things. Do we want him to? Am I now caught in a loop of asking myself rhetorical questions? Yes. Okay. So KJ Winston, I want to see him perform too. I would love to see him run a 4-4 something because, well, no, I wanted the Bills to draft him in the second round. And so I really want him to not run, but like, I want to see it happen. You know, I want him to run a 4-4 because he's a guy that could have been a first-round draft pick had he been able to play and test and all those things. He would have been the Imanwari kid from South Carolina. He would have been a version of that, running in the 4-4s, 6'1.5" or something like that, 32-inch arms, big, lean frame, can play off-coverage man, can play zone, does everything, enforcer in the run game, hits bigger than he is. It's he's the whole thing. Do we get to see any of that? I want to see some of it. And then, of course, Tyler Warren, does he run a 40? That's what everybody wants to know. Does he run a 40? Again, I don't know that it would be a good decision for him to run a 40, but he could. And it might not even affect his draft stock. Maybe some teams would take him out, but then they would be the dumb ones that are always picking in the top 10. So there's that. And then here's in the chat. You beat me to it, Matthew. Matthew John says Vanover is a sleeper. I wanted to get to the combine snubs because I think this is a deep group of players that can play in the NFL. Really, there's 3 guys that I want to highlight. Mean Vanover is one of them. A guy who's 6. I don't even know what he is. 6'3". He looks like he's 6'5". He's got one of the biggest frames of somebody I've ever seen. You know, in person for the size he is. He's 266, walking around lean. Biggest hands you've ever seen. Like he shook my hand and it went up to like my wrist. The dude can play in the NFL. NFL body. Where does he fit? Some teams are going to want him to be, he might not be explosive enough to be that guy that plays on the edge. He is quick and he is violent and he is powerful. He can be a power end for a team that wants to play a lot of 4-down fronts and light boxes. He can help with that. Does he have the juice to be an elite pass rusher? Probably not, but he can be a rotational guy. I think there is an avenue for him there. We've also seen him play a little bit heavier. So is the answer that he plays like a 5 technique, gains a little bit of that weight back, plays 275, maybe, let's say 280, and plays like a base end in a 3-4. He's got the body type that if you're a defensive line coach, you're excited because it's anything you want it to be. He's strong enough to do any of those things. And I think that there is a path for him to the NFL. So what do we see from him? What are the metrics? What are the timing, those things that give us a hint of which way he should go in the NFL? Because in college, he could be a defensive end. He was athletic enough. The bar is raised in the NFL. So the Abdul Carters of the world, those are the ones that make it in the NFL as defensive ends. What if you're not that? Is he going to be a base defensive end? What is he going to be at the next level? Does he have special traits? Because the length, everything, NFL body type. The next guy, and really I think the first guy that I've been talking about a lot this year in the offseason is Jalen Kimber. He's got elite speed, I went back and I watched all of his reps. There was no receiver that got away from him, really, that got away from him. And I mean, even Jeremiah Smith he stayed with. Now, he got one catch on him on a slant where he was playing off coverage in cover 3. Did he break on that and did he limit it to no yards after the catch? No. But if you're talking about a guy who's a veteran and has NFL skills, the size and everything that he has are all check the box NFL ability. That is not a one-to-one correlation to then being good in the NFL, but it gets you in the door, and that's what the draft is. It's about getting you in the door. And if you're in the 5th or 6th or 7th round, and you're saying we need a guy that can play on special teams and can be depth, and maybe we take a flyer on this guy and he has upside to be a starter, and now we have a super cheap starting corner, Jalen Kimber. I think that's your guy, a guy in this draft. Now, the performance on the field is what it is. Productivity. Not good. Not good this past season. Absurdly low, honestly, ball productivity. And then just generally making plays, like preventative coverage was what he did. And I think that's another way he's going to be a guy that can fit into a lot of different systems because his size, he's not very big, and he's super, he's one of those elite athletes as a 5-star, went to the South and played in Georgia and Florida, and then finally made his way up to the Big Ten country. He's better in zone than you would think. He's probably better in zone than in man coverage. I like the way he plays zones because he does a great job of having his eyes on the quarterback and feeling where the routes are. So he's perfectly in position to frustrate the read for the quarterback, where he can break on either pass. Now, the thing in the NFL is going to be that he's got to be able to then break on the ball and make plays. And he's not going to prove that here. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about is check every other box so that somebody says, you know what? We'll take a chance on you when he gets drafted. Because I think, again, he can play in the NFL. It's going to be a guy that, from a physical standpoint, can prove all of those things. And then the last player is Keziah Izzard. This one's on the fringe. I've always thought he had the ability to be a starter, like baseline, a starter at Penn State. Size, quickness, violence, and strength from a defensive tackle. He had the length. He was the perfect prototypical 3 technique that I thought Penn State had been looking for a long time. It just never happened. He was productive. There were times he flashed, but if you're a veteran, been around 5 years, I think now, and you've never started, you've been a rotational player, that says something. So for him, the conversation here is not get drafted to me. It's, do you put enough, again, of those height, weight, speed metrics, and you're explosive and you run really well, that a team is going to take you as a UDFA after, like a priority free agent. I think he could make some moves there to make himself a part of that conversation. Sal Wormley is the same way in that sense, but Vanover could stick on a roster, I think, given the opportunity. The turn has to be, now it translates into plays, into tackles and pressures, instead of just, I'm in my gap, I'm doing my job. Or I'm not in my gap and I'm kind of doing my job. I've made some sort of ruckus for the offense, but not really impact, like, Zane Durant level plays. He's not going to be that. What is he going to be at the NFL? How does he make all of these things work for him with his tools? Because those tools are good enough to play in the NFL. Those 3 guys, NFL skills, didn't get to go to the combine because depth at their particular positions and, performance. The NFL picks teams, say, like, these are the players we want to go, and then it's voted on. And then they all, there's a list made from those submissions. Those guys didn't make the list. Now they have their opportunity. Matthew says Kimber gives him Tariq Castro Field vibes. Yeah. Christian Campbell might be another guy. I like yours, but Christian Campbell, Tariq Castro Fields, I think both of those are guys that are pretty fair. So Matthew does ask no Wormley. So you asked the question, so I will answer it. But generally, my if you don't have something nice to say, don't say it, sort of thing. And Salim Wormley, if he was productive this last year and he got incrementally better at football, part of it was he was a 6th-year guy, 5th-year, 2019 recruiting class playing in football. And so he had a massive advantage in terms of being an old man in college football. Did he get better at Penn State? Yes. Did he get better in the last 3 years? And so, like, where's the upside? Is the baseline we saw from him good enough to play in the NFL? It could be. Like, again, it kind of like Penn State. I asked the question, could they play close games all the way with every single team until they get to the national championship game? They almost did that. And maybe Sal Wormley, he's big enough, his size and his strength. It's just the movement skills and some of the explosiveness. You know, you've got to be, even at guard, you've got to be a really great athlete. The average athletes in the NFL are great college athletes. And so there's a couple things there that I don't see the transition for Sal. And, you know, when you're in college for that long, there's a reason. So I give him all the opportunity in the world that he wants. You know, you can work your ass off and make yourself into that. We'll see if he's able to do that. We'll see if all of that comes to fruition. But because you asked, I'll say, like, he's not on my list, and those are the reasons why. Okay. That's a good show. That flew by. Thank you for being here. As always, subscribe to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. James Franklin, noon tomorrow. Make sure that you're checking in to our live replay, which will be 5 minutes after he's done talking. Immediately following, we'll have our live replay here on the YouTube channel. And, of course, come back with the Wednesday show. Congratulations to the wrestling team. I meant to say that when I was talking about Greg at the beginning of the show. Congratulations to yet another national championship. The reason I didn't feel like I needed to say is because we're going to have a whole show about that sometime in the next day or two, talking about Penn State wrestling and their domination of the sport. All that coming up this week on the BWI live show here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. We'll talk to you then.